I never thought I'd be sleeping in my own garage at 72. I was arranging my new bedroom when my phone lit up with a number I'd been avoiding for weeks. David Reynolds flashed across the screen like an unexpected ghost from my past. The same man who had proposed to me 50 years ago now wanted something from me, and I knew exactly what it was. It was a Tuesday morning, unseasonably cool for April. Sunlight filtered through the small, dusty window of the garage, casting long shadows across the cement floor of what had been my husband Frank's workshop for 30 years. I smoothed the quilted bedspread over the fold-out sofa my children had deemed perfectly adequate for my temporary situation. Single cardboard boxes lined one wall, hastily labeled Mom's Stuff in my daughter Jennifer's impatient handwriting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When the phone rang, I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers usually meant medical billing offices or scammers targeting seniors. But something, curiosity maybe, or that sixth sense that comes with age, made me pick up. Hello? My voice was guarded, a habit I'd developed since becoming the problem my children needed to solve. The voice that answered was warm, confident, and achingly familiar. Maggie? Maggie Wilson? It's David Reynolds. 50 years. 50 years since I'd heard that voice. Since the summer after college when I chose Frank instead, when David left Oak Ridge with nothing but a business degree and a broken heart. His voice was older now, of course, but still carried that distinctive, gentle tone that used to make butterflies dance in my stomach. I said nothing, waiting. The silence stretched between us like a physical thing. Maggie, are you there? He sounded uncertain now, almost vulnerable. I'm here. 2 words, neutral, giving nothing away. I need to talk to you. It's important. A pause. It's about Willow Creek. Of course it was. What else would make him reach out after all these years? Not to reminisce about our college romance, not to catch up on 5 decades of life, not to apologize for the angry words we'd exchanged the why. Last time we spoke, when he'd told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. What about it? I kept my tone even, betraying nothing of the sudden acceleration of my pulse. There's been some development interest in your neighborhood. Pretty significant interest, actually. My company has acquired several properties on your street already. I glanced at the real estate brochures Jennifer had accidentally left in my kitchen, showcasing Oak Ridge Heights, the luxury retirement community where they wanted to relocate me. The same glossy brochures I'd been throwing away for months. That's not a surprise, I said finally. My children have made it clear they think this house is too much for me. So you know about the offers? He sounded relieved. Good. That makes this easier. Maggie, the standard offers going out are strong, but I'd like to discuss something more personalized for your property, given its position and, well, given our history. I felt a flicker of something. Not quite anger. Not quite hurt. At his casual reference to our history, as if it were a footnote rather than the road not taken. My property isn't for sale, David. A pause. Your daughter Jennifer seems to think otherwise. She's been in touch with my office several times. The betrayal shouldn't have stung as much as it did. After all, Jennifer had made no secret of her desire to simplify my living situation and unlock my home equity. But going behind my back to contact developers crossed a line I hadn't expected even she would cross. My daughter doesn't own this house, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I do. Maggie, is everything okay? Jennifer mentioned you were having some memory issues, that you'd agreed to downsize but then changed your mind. Memory issues. Of course that's what she'd told him. It was the same line she'd used with my doctor, with my friends. with anyone who might question why a perfectly independent woman was suddenly being pressured to leave her home. My memory is fine, David. Crystal clear, in fact. Clear enough to remember that my children have moved me into my garage while they prepare to sell my house from under me. The words hung in the air between us. I hadn't meant to reveal so much, especially not to him. You're living in your garage? His voice had changed, the businessman replaced by something more personal, more concerned. Maggie, what's going on over there? Nothing I can't handle, I said, falling back on the independence that had sustained me through Frank's death 5 years ago, through the lonely months of grief, through the gradual realization that my children saw me not as a person but as a problem to solve, an asset to manage. I'd like to see you, he said suddenly, in person. Talk about the development plans, yes, but also, it's been a long time, Maggie. Too long. I looked around at the makeshift living space my children had created for me. The fold-out sofa, the small microwave on Frank's old workbench, the portable toilet hidden behind a flimsy screen that Jennifer had called perfectly adequate for nighttime needs. My home of 40 years reduced to 400 square feet of concrete and cobwebs. Willow Creek Cafe, I said finally. Tomorrow at 10. But David, I hesitated. I'm not selling my house. Not to you, not to anyone. I understand. Just a conversation between old friends. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the fold-out bed, my hands trembling slightly. David Reynolds, back in Oak Ridge, buying up properties on my street. The coincidence seemed too great, the timing too convenient. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the side door opening. Jennifer appeared, her sleek bob perfect as always, designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, expression a practiced mix of concern and efficiency. Mom, who were you talking to? She glanced at the phone in my hand with suspicion. Just an old friend, I said, unwilling to give her more ammunition. She looked around the garage with what she probably thought was an encouraging smile. Getting settled in okay? Mark and I worked really hard to make this comfortable for you. Mark, my son, who had been even more insistent than Jennifer about the need to capitalize on the current market before property values inevitably declined. Mark, who hadn't visited me once in the 3 weeks since they'd converted the garage. It's a garage, Jennifer, I said flatly. No amount of throw pillows changes that. Her smile tightened. It's temporary, Mom. Just until we finalize the sale and get you settled at Oak Ridge Heights. You'll love it there. Activities, peers, medical staff on site. No more rattling around this big house all alone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I wasn't rattling around. I was living in my home. The home your father and I paid off 20 years ago. Jennifer sighed, the long-suffering sound she'd perfected in her teenage years. We've been over this. The house is too big. The maintenance is too much. The stairs are dangerous. You agreed, remember? I had never agreed. I had simply stopped arguing after the third family meeting, where my objections were reframed as confusion and my anger as emotional volatility. It was easier to appear to acquiesce than to watch my children exchange those knowing looks, those silent communications that said, "See? She's not rational anymore." I need to get my medication from inside, I said instead of arguing. Jennifer's eyes flickered with something, guilt perhaps, or discomfort. I'll get it for you. What do you need? The blue pill case on my nightstand, and my gardening gloves from the mudroom. The community garden won't weed itself. Mom, are you sure? You should be gardening? Dr. Patel said regular activity is essential for my well-being. I cut her off. Gardening is my activity. Has been for 40 years. After Jennifer left to fetch my things, I pulled out the small notebook I'd been keeping. hidden beneath my mattress. In it, I'd been documenting everything: the family meetings, the gradual removal of my belongings from the main house, the conversations where my words were twisted, the sudden appearance of real estate agents offering just a quick walkthrough. And now David Reynolds, developer, former flame, the man I'd almost married before Frank transferred to Oak Ridge State and swept me off my feet. Was it coincidence? Or something more calculated? I added today's date and noted our conversation, the revelation that Jennifer had contacted his company directly. When Jennifer returned with my medication and gloves, I thanked her with as much warmth as I could muster. No need to raise her suspicions. "I thought I'd make pot roast tonight," she said, hovering in the doorway. "Your recipe. We could eat together in the kitchen." The olive branch was unexpected. Jennifer had been taking most of her meals at her own home across town, leaving me with microwave dinners and pointed remarks about how cooking for one is such a waste. "That would be nice," I said cautiously. Good. She seemed relieved. "Oh, and Mr. Chen from Golden Bridge Realty is stopping by around 7, just for a quick chat about market conditions. Nothing serious." And there it was, the real reason for the family dinner. Another ambush, another realtor, another conversation where my objections would be smoothed over with, "Mom's just having a difficult day and she'll come around once she sees the numbers." "I have plans tonight," I lied. "Garden committee meeting." Jennifer's face fell, then hardened. "You need to be realistic, Mom. This house is an asset, your biggest asset. Mark and I are just trying to help you secure your future." My future. As if at 72, my future was the only consideration. As if my present, my daily life, my routines, my independence counted for nothing. "My future is my concern," I said, pulling on my gardening gloves with more force than necessary. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm late for my volunteer shift." I walked past her, head high, back straight, moving with the deliberate grace that Frank had always admired. "Look at you, Maggie girl," he used to say. "Strong as an oak, but graceful as a willow." I'd need all that strength in the days ahead. The Oak Ridge Community Center was just 6 blocks from my house, an easy walk I'd made thousands of times over the years. As a retired elementary school teacher, I'd naturally gravitated toward volunteer work, spending 3 mornings a week helping with the children's reading program and tending the community garden that provided fresh produce for the local food bank. The garden was my sanctuary, the place where I felt most connected to Frank, to myself, to the community we'd built together. Each plant, each carefully tended bed, represented years of care and knowledge. I knew which varieties thrived in Oak Ridge's clay soil, which needed extra drainage, which flourished in companion plantings. "There she is," called Rita Fernandez, my fellow garden volunteer and one of the few friends who hadn't been scared off by Jennifer's suggestions that I was becoming fragile. At 68, Rita was a force of nature herself, a retired nurse with a no-nonsense attitude and a wickedly sharp sense of humor. "Sorry I'm late," I said, joining her by the tomato beds. "Family drama." Rita made a face. "Those kids of yours still trying to ship you off to the old folks' factory?" "Worse. They've moved me to the garage while they prep the house for sale." Rita's pruning shears stopped mid-cut. "They've what now?" "Converted the garage. Fold-out bed, microwave, portable toilet behind a screen. Very dignified." "Margaret Wilson." Rita used my full name, a sure sign she was upset. "Tell me you're not actually staying out there." I shrugged, focusing on pulling a particularly stubborn weed. "For now. I'm gathering information, making a plan." "A plan? You need a lawyer, not a plan. That's elder abuse, what they're doing. It's complicated." I sighed, sitting back on my heels. They think they're doing what's best, and legally, it's murky. I'm still in my home technically, just not the main part. Rita muttered something that sounded suspiciously like a curse. "And what's this plan of yours?" I told her about David's call, about the meeting scheduled for tomorrow, about my suspicions regarding Jennifer's involvement. "David Reynolds?" Rita's eyes widened. "Your college boyfriend David? The one that got away?" "He didn't get away," I corrected her. "I chose Frank. Best decision I ever made." Still, Rita waggled her eyebrows suggestively. Fate has a funny way of circling back around. "This isn't fate, it's real estate development, and possibly my daughter manipulating the situation." Rita sobered. "What are you going to do? Meet with him. Find out exactly what's going on. See if Jennifer has been feeding him the same lines about my memory issues and inability to care for myself." And then? I looked out over the community garden, at the new spring growth pushing through soil we'd amended and nurtured over decades. Stubborn, persistent life finding its way despite obstacles. Then I fight for what's mine. The rest of the afternoon passed in the comfortable rhythm of garden work, weeding, pruning, checking the irrigation system. Physical labor had always cleared my mind, and by the time I headed home, I had the outlines of a strategy. I would meet with David, yes, but not just to discuss the development. I needed information about the scope of the project, about which neighbors had sold, about what Jennifer had told him. Knowledge was power, and I'd been kept deliberately ignorant of too much for too long. As I approached my house, my beautiful craftsman-style home with the wraparound porch where Frank and I had spent countless summer evenings, I noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway. Sleek, black, expensive. Next to it stood Mark's SUV, which meant my son had finally deigned to make an appearance. I squared my shoulders and entered through the main door, ignoring the side entrance to my garage apartment. This was still my house, regardless of where they'd relegated me to sleep. The voices from the kitchen fell silent as I walked in. Mark, Jennifer, and a well-dressed Asian man, who I assumed was Mr. Chen from Golden Bridge Realty, sat around my kitchen table, the same sturdy oak table where I'd helped my children with homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where Frank and I had planned our retirement. "Mom!" Jennifer's surprise was evident. "We thought you were at your garden meeting." "Canceled," I lied smoothly. "Water main break at the community center." Mark stood, awkwardly formal. At 48, he looked more like Frank every day. Same broad shoulders, same crinkles around. The eyes when he smiled. But Frank had never looked at me with that mixture of impatience and condescension. "Mom, this is Michael Chen from Golden Bridge Realty. He's been helping us research options for your situation." My situation. As if my life were a problem to be solved rather than, well, my life. "Mr. Chen." I nodded politely. "I understand you're here to discuss selling my home without my consent." Jennifer made a strangled sound. "Mom, that's not... We're just exploring options." "Mrs. Wilson," Mr. Chen looked uncomfortable. "I was given to understand that you were on board with the sale. That due to health concerns, you were looking to downsize to a more manageable living situation." "Were you also given to understand that I've been moved to the garage while these discussions take place?" I asked pleasantly. Mr. Chen's discomfort visibly increased. "I was told you had a separate apartment on the property. Yes." "Mom's being dramatic," Mark cut in. "We've converted the garage into a perfectly comfortable mother-in-law suite. Temporarily," he added with a sharp look at me, "until the sale goes through and she moves to Oak Ridge Heights." "I see." Mr. Chen glanced between us, clearly sensing the tension. "Perhaps this isn't the best time to discuss market strategies. I can come back when—" "Actually," I interrupted, pulling out a chair and sitting down at my own kitchen table. "This is the perfect time. I'd like to understand exactly what's being proposed for my property." Jennifer shot Mark a panicked, "Look, but I kept my attention on Mr. Chen. "Well," he began cautiously, "your home sits on a very desirable lot. Corner property, larger than average for the neighborhood, established landscaping. The craftsman style is extremely popular right now, especially with the original woodwork you've maintained." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Given the recent development interest in Oak Ridge, particularly from Ridge Summit Partners' new mixed-use project, properties in this area are commanding premium prices. We'd be looking at listing at least 30% above what similar homes were selling for just 2 years ago." Ridge Summit Partners, David's company. So it was true. He was behind the development pressure in my neighborhood. "And how many of my neighbors have sold already?" I asked. Mr. Chen hesitated, glancing at Mark. "It's a matter of public record," I reminded him. "I can look it up myself." 5 properties on this street so far," he admitted. 3 more are in negotiations. Ridge Summit is assembling quite a significant parcel. "For what purpose?" I pressed. "Mom," Jennifer interrupted, "the details of the development aren't important. What matters is securing your future. The equity from this house would pay for years at Oak Ridge Heights, with plenty left over for you and Mark to inherit," I finished for her. An uncomfortable silence fell over the kitchen. Mr. Chen cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should come back another time," he suggested, gathering his materials. "Family discussions about transitions can be emotional, and it's important that everyone feels heard." "Thank you, Mr. Chen, but that won't be necessary," I said, rising from my chair. "My home is not for sale. Not now, not in the future. I appreciate your time, but any further discussions would be wasting it." "Mom!" Mark's voice took on the sharp edge I'd come to dread. "You're not thinking clearly. This offer won't be available forever. The market could shift, or your health." My health is fine," I cut him off. "As my doctor would confirm, if you'd bothered to attend any of my appointments instead of just calling him afterward to suggest I'm declining." Jennifer gasped. "That's not fair. We're worried about you." "No," I looked between my 2 children. "These strangers who shared my blood but seemingly none of my values. You're worried about my house, about my assets, not about me." Mr. Chen, looking increasingly uncomfortable, made a hasty retreat, murmuring polite goodbyes. I showed him to the door, then turned back to face my children. "I'm meeting with David Reynolds tomorrow," I told them, taking a small satisfaction in their shocked expressions. "Yes, the David Reynolds behind Ridge Summit Partners. He called me today." "You? You know David Reynolds?" Jennifer stammered. "We go back a long way," I said simply. "And I intend to find out exactly what game is being played here, by him and by the 2 of you." Mark recovered first. "This is ridiculous. You're being paranoid. We're trying to help you. By moving me to the garage? By contacting realtors? Behind my back? By whispering to my doctor about cognitive concerns that don't exist?" "The garage apartment is perfectly adequate," Jennifer protested. "We spent thousands making it comfortable for you." "Then you can sleep there," I said, calmly, "because I'm moving back into my bedroom tonight." The explosion I expected didn't come. Instead, Mark and Jennifer exchanged one of those meaningful glances that made my skin crawl. "Mom," Mark said, his voice gentler now, placating, "we've already packed up most of your bedroom. The furniture is being picked up tomorrow for consignment." My bedroom, where Frank and I had slept for 40 years, where I'd nursed both children through childhood illnesses, where I'd held Frank's hand in his final days as cancer took him piece by piece. "You sold my bedroom furniture?" My voice sounded distant, even to my own ears. "Not sold yet," Jennifer clarified quickly. "Just consigned. And we've kept your personal items, of course. They're in storage at Mark's." The room seemed to tilt slightly. This was worse than I'd imagined. They hadn't just relegated me to the garage, they'd actively dismantled my life, piece by piece, without my knowledge or consent. "Get out," I said quietly. "Mom, get out of my house." My voice was steady, controlled. "Both of you, now." "You're upset," Jennifer said, reaching for me. "Let's talk about this calmly." I stepped back from her touch. "There's nothing to discuss. You've sold my furniture. You've moved me to the garage. You've lied to realtors, to developers, possibly to my doctor. There is no calm conversation to be had here." "Fine," Mark snapped, his temporary gentleness evaporating. "Be unreasonable. But this is happening, Mom. The sooner you accept it, the easier this transition will be." "Leave your keys," I said as they gathered their things. "Both of you." "What? That's absurd," Jennifer protested. "We need access to continue preparing the house." "It's my house," I reminded them, "and I'm revoking your access. Keys on the counter, please." After a tense standoff, they complied, slamming their keys down with matching expressions of indignation. "This isn't over," Mark warned as they headed for the door. "You're only making things harder on yourself." When they were gone, I sank into a kitchen chair, the magnitude of what I was facing finally hitting me. My own children had systematically undermined my independence, my autonomy, my very home, all while believing they were acting in my best interest. And tomorrow, I would face David Reynolds, the man I'd once loved, now apparently complicit in the scheme to remove me from my home. I pulled out my phone and dialed Rita. "I need a favor," I said when she answered. "Can you come stay with me tonight? And maybe drive me to a meeting tomorrow morning?" "Of course, honey. What's happened?" "Everything," I said, looking around at my kitchen, one of the few rooms still intact, "and nothing good." As I waited for Rita to arrive, I walked through my house, taking stock. My bedroom had indeed been emptied of furniture, with only bare spots on the carpet showing where my bed and dresser had stood for decades. Frank's study had been similarly cleared, with just outlines of dust marking where bookshelves had once lined the walls. They had been methodical, I had to give them that. While keeping me distracted with concerns about my health and endless discussions about retirement communities, they had quietly dismantled my life, piece by piece. But they had underestimated me. They had forgotten who I was before I was their mother, a woman who had worked full-time while raising them, who had nursed a husband through terminal illness without faltering, who had built a life of meaning and purpose through sheer determination. And they had no idea about my history with David Reynolds. Tomorrow would change everything. One way or another, I would reclaim what was mine, my home, my dignity, and my right to determine my own future. The garage apartment might be where I was sleeping tonight, but it would not be where I stayed. As darkness fell, I gathered what I needed for the morning: my notebook documenting the past months of manipulation, the property deed showing my sole ownership since Frank's death, and a small photo album I kept hidden beneath the garage workbench. In it was a picture from 50 years ago, a young woman with auburn hair standing between two young men on a college campus. On her left, Frank Wilson, tall and broad-shouldered, already looking at her with the steady devotion that would define their marriage. On her right, David Reynolds, leaner, more intense, his arm casually around her waist in a gesture of possession that the photograph had captured, but that she hadn't noticed at the time. I studied the image, remembering the day it was taken, the last day the three of us were together before I made my choice and our paths diverged. Frank into teaching and family life with me in Oak Ridge, David into real estate development and, from what I'd gathered over the years, a series of marriages and increasing wealth. Now our paths had crossed again, under circumstances I could never have imagined. Was it coincidence? Or had David deliberately targeted my neighborhood, my home? Tomorrow I would find out. And then I would decide my next move in this game. I never asked to play, but was now determined to win. Rita arrived just after dusk, her ancient station wagon crunching on the gravel driveway. She carried an overnight bag and a casserole dish, both of which she thrust at me before enveloping me in a fierce hug. "Oh, Maggie," she murmured against my hair. "What a mess those kids have made." "Come see for yourself," I said, leading her around to the side entrance of the garage. Rita's face darkened as she took in my new living quarters, the concrete floors, the makeshift bathroom area, the single lamp casting harsh shadows across Frank's old tools still hanging on the walls. "They've lost their minds," she declared, setting her overnight bag on the fold-out sofa with enough force to make the springs protest. "This is abuse, plain and simple." "It's complicated," I sighed, placing the casserole on the small table Jennifer had set up as a dining area. "They think they're protecting me. From myself, apparently." Rita snorted. "From your assets, more like. Have you called a lawyer yet?" "Not yet." I'd been reluctant to escalate the situation, still hoping to find a resolution that wouldn't permanently damage my relationship with my children. "I want to see what David has to say first." Rita's expression softened. "You really think your old flame might be the key to all this?" "I don't know what to think anymore." I sat heavily on the edge of the sofa. "It's too much of a coincidence, him showing up now, buying properties all around me." "Men like that don't believe in coincidences," Rita said wisely. "They create opportunities." We ate in silence for a while, the homemade lasagna warming me despite the chill seeping through the garage's thin insulation. Having Rita there, solid, practical, fiercely loyal Rita, made me feel less alone, less like I was losing my grip on reality. "I checked the county records before I came over," Rita said casually, refilling our water glasses. "Public information, all online now." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" "Ridge Summit Partners has acquired 7 properties in this neighborhood in the last 4 months. All cash purchases, all above market value." She paused. "Your daughter Jennifer is listed as the real estate agent on 3 of those deals." The lasagna turned to ash in my mouth. "Jennifer? My Jennifer is working with David's company?" Rita nodded grimly. "Commission on those sales would be substantial. 6 figures, easily." The betrayal felt physical, a hollowness expanding beneath my ribs. Not just pushing me out of my home, but profiting from it. From displacing our neighbors, people who had attended Frank's funeral, who had brought casseroles and flowers, who had checked in on me after. "I need to lie down," I murmured, suddenly exhausted. Rita cleared away our plates, insisting I take the fold-out sofa while she set up an air mattress she'd brought along. "Tomorrow," she promised as we settled in for the night, the garage dark, except for a thin line of moonlight filtering through the dusty window. We find out exactly what game they're playing, and then we beat them at it. I dozed fitfully, dreams mixing with memories. Frank and I painting the nursery for Jennifer, Mark's college graduation, David standing in the rain outside my dormitory the night I told him I'd chosen Frank instead. Past and present blurring until I wasn't sure which hurts were old and which were fresh. Morning came too quickly, gray light seeping into the garage as Rita and I prepared for the day ahead. I dressed carefully in a cornflower blue dress that Frank had always loved, applied light makeup, and styled my silver hair into the neat bob I'd worn for decades. "You look ready for battle," Rita observed, handing me a travel mug of coffee she'd sneaked into the main house to brew. "In a way, I am." I checked my purse one last time. Deed, notebook, photos, reading glasses. The ammunition I might need for whatever confrontation lay ahead. The Willow Creek Cafe sat on Main Street, a local institution that had somehow survived the influx of chain restaurants and coffee shops. Frank and I had eaten breakfast there every Saturday for 30 years, at the same corner booth beneath the stained glass window featuring the cafe's namesake willow tree. Rita dropped me off at the curb, promising to return in an hour. Text me if you need extraction earlier, she said, sounding more like the army nurse she'd once been than the garden club volunteer she was now. I'll be at the library across the street watching. David was already waiting when I arrived, seated at my usual booth as if he knew it was mine. Perhaps he did. Perhaps he'd done more research on me than I realized. At 73, he was still handsome in that polished way he'd always had. Silver hair expertly cut, tailored suit that spoke of money without shouting it. The same strong jaw and observant eyes I remembered from our youth. When he saw me, he stood, a gesture of the old-fashioned courtesy he'd been raised with. "Maggie," he said, his voice warming on my name. "You look wonderful." "David." I slid into the booth across from him, keeping my expression neutral. "You look successful." He laughed, the same rich sound that had once made my heart race. "Direct as ever, one of the things I always admired about you." The waitress, Darlene, who had served Frank and me for decades, approached with a knowing smile. "The usual, Mrs. Wilson?" "Yes, please. Tea with lemon and a slice of banana bread." "And for your friend?" There was a question in her eyes, a gentle curiosity. "Coffee black," David said, "and whatever pastry you recommend." When Darlene had gone, a silence fell between us, heavy with 50 years of unspoken things, of paths not taken, of the current circumstances that had brought us together again. "So," I finally said, "Ridge Summit Partners. Quite a portfolio you've assembled in Oak Ridge." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, assessing. "You've done your homework. When a developer starts buying up properties around my home, it seems prudent to pay attention." He nodded, conceding the point. "We've been expanding our footprint in several communities like Oak Ridge. Mid-sized towns with good infrastructure, strong community values, proximity to urban centers but with their own distinct character." "And what exactly are you developing these properties for?" "Mixed use primarily, residential with some retail, community spaces, green initiatives." He paused as Darlene returned with our order. "The Willow Creek project is particularly exciting. Revitalization. Without gentrification, maintaining the character of the neighborhood while providing updated housing options." It was a smooth pitch, well-rehearsed and earnest-sounding. The kind of development proposal that won over town councils and planning committees. "And my home?" I asked, stirring lemon into my tea. "How does it fit into this vision?" "Your property is..." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Uniquely positioned. The corner lot, the craftsman architecture, the established gardens. It could be a centerpiece, preserved rather than demolished." "Preserved as what, exactly?" "A community space, perhaps, or a model home for the development. The details are flexible." I took a bite of banana bread, giving myself time to think. David was being careful, diplomatic, not revealing too much. "My daughter Jennifer has been acting as agent on some of your acquisitions," I said, watching his reaction closely. If he was surprised that I knew this, he didn't show it. "She approached us, actually, said she had intimate knowledge of the neighborhood and could facilitate transactions discreetly." "I bet she could," I murmured. "Did she also tell you I was experiencing cognitive decline and needed to be moved to assisted living for my own good?" A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "She expressed concerns about your living situation, yes, mentioned that the house was becoming difficult for you to maintain, and that I'm currently living in my garage while they sell off my belongings. And prepare my house for sale without my consent?" Now he looked genuinely startled. "The situation you described yesterday, I assumed it was temporary. An arrangement while renovations were happening, perhaps." "No renovations, David. just a systematic effort to remove me from my home so it can be sold. Preferably to you, it seems. He sat back, coffee forgotten. Maggie, if I had known… What? That my children were essentially forcing me out? Would that have changed your development plans? Made you reconsider buying up my neighbors' homes above market value, creating pressure for others to sell? His expression hardened slightly. Business is business, Maggie. I didn't create the real estate market, but I've always conducted my affairs ethically. Is it ethical to work with my daughter behind my back? To discuss my property when I'm the sole owner? Jennifer gave me to understand that she had your power of attorney, that you had agreed to her handling your affairs. The shock must have shown on my face because David immediately looked concerned. You didn't sign a power of attorney? Absolutely not. My hands were shaking now, anger and betrayal making it difficult to maintain my composure. I have never signed any such document. My affairs are my own. David pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. I need to check something. Excuse me for a moment. While he was occupied, I took several deep breaths, trying to center myself. The cafe around us continued its morning routine. The clatter of dishes, conversations humming, the bell above the door announcing new customers. Normal life continuing while mine seemed to be crumbling around me. Maggie. David's voice was serious now, all business charm gone. There's something you need to see. He turned his phone toward me, displaying an email with an attachment. The subject line read, M. Wilson POA documentation, and the sender was Jennifer's work email. With trembling fingers, I took the phone, opening the attachment. There it was, a power of attorney document with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom, dated 6 months ago, giving Jennifer broad authority over my financial and healthcare decisions. I never signed this, I whispered. The room suddenly, too warm, too close. This is a forgery. David took the phone back, his expression troubled. Are you certain? Sometimes these things are done during routine estate planning, with several documents at once. I know my own signature, I said firmly, though the sight of it had shaken me. And I know I never signed a power of attorney. I met with my attorney after Frank died, updated my will, but specifically declined a POA because I was in good health and fully capable. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, decision made. This changes things. How so? Ridge Summit has strict protocols about property acquisition. We don't pressure vulnerable homeowners. We don't engage in transactions with disputed ownership or representation, and we certainly don't participate in potential elder exploitation. Elder exploitation, I repeated, the clinical term making the personal betrayal somehow more stark. Maggie? He leaned forward, his voice dropping. If what you're saying is true, if Jennifer has misrepresented her authority and is attempting to sell your home without legitimate consent, then we have a serious legal situation on our hands. It's true, I said simply. You can see for yourself. Come to my house. See where they've moved me. See the stripped rooms, the possessions they've taken. He checked his watch, then nodded. I have a meeting at 11, but I can reschedule. This takes precedence. Outside, I texted Rita. Change of plans. Coming home with David. Meet us there. The drive back to Willow Creek was quiet. David following my directions, though I suspected he already knew the way. As we pulled into my driveway, I saw with relief that neither Jennifer's nor Mark's cars were present. Here we are, I said unnecessarily as we parked. Home sweet home. At least the main structure still is. David surveyed the property with a developer's eye, taking in the mature landscaping, the architectural details of the craftsman porch, the solid construction that had weathered 50 Oak Ridge winters. You and Frank did well for yourselves, he commented as we approached the front door. We were teachers, not developers, I reminded him, unlocking the door. But yes, We were comfortable, happy. The entry hall was much as I'd left it yesterday, though I noticed more of the family photos had been removed from the walls, leaving conspicuous empty spaces. "Let me show you what they've been doing," I said, leading him through the house, the cabinet, emptied bedroom, the boxes stacked in corners, the subtle but unmistakable signs of a home being dismantled. David followed silently, his expression darkening with each room. When we reached the kitchen, Rita was already there, arms crossed, watching us with undisguised curiosity. "So this is the famous David Reynolds," she said by way of greeting. "Rita Fernandez," I made the introduction. "My closest friend, and apparently the only person who believed me when I said my children were gaslighting me." David extended his hand, which Rita took after a moment's hesitation. "I'm beginning to believe her too," he said grimly. "And now, the pièce de résistance," I said, leading them both to the side door that connected to the garage. "My new apartment." David's expression when he saw my living situation was everything I had hoped for. Shock giving way to anger, then to a carefully controlled neutrality that I recognized from our college days when he was truly upset. "This is..." He searched for words, completely unacceptable. "It's elder abuse," Rita supplied helpfully. "Criminal, if you ask me." I'm inclined to agree. He turned to me. "Maggie, how long has this been going on?" I retrieved my notebook from beneath the fold-out. Mattress handing it to him. "I've documented everything. The family meetings started about 8 months ago, shortly after my annual physical. The suggestions about downsizing became pressure, then demands. The conversion of the garage happened 3 weeks ago while I was at a garden club weekend in Portland." David flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. "You've been thorough." "I was a teacher for 40 years. Documentation is second nature." He handed the notebook back, his decision apparently made. "Ridge Summit is withdrawing from any negotiations regarding your property, effective immediately." The relief that flooded through me was immediate and profound. "Thank you." "Additionally," he continued, "I'll be instructing our legal team to investigate the circumstances of our transactions with Jennifer. If she misrepresented her authority with us, there could be serious consequences." Rita looked impressed, despite herself. "You'd do that? Even though it might complicate your development plans?" "I've built my company on ethical practices," David said firmly. "We're successful because we do things right, not because we take advantage of situations like this." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted us. Through the garage window, I saw Jennifer's Mercedes, followed closely by Mark's SUV. "Perfect timing," Rita muttered. "Do you want me to stay?" David asked, watching my reaction. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my dress. "Yes? I think it's time we all had an honest conversation about what's been happening here." The side door opened and Jennifer stepped in, freezing when she saw the three of us standing there. Mark crowded in behind her, his expression shifting, from surprise to wariness when he recognized David. "Mom?" Jennifer's voice was carefully controlled. "What's going on? Why is Mr. Reynolds here?" "That's an excellent question," I said calmly. "Why don't we all go into the kitchen and discuss it? Along with this power of attorney document you apparently sent to Ridge Summit Partners." The color drained from Jennifer's face. Mark looked confused, then alarmed as understanding dawned. "The kitchen," I repeated, gesturing toward the door. "Now." They filed out silently. The power dynamic shifted so abruptly that neither seemed to know how to respond. In the kitchen, they took seats at the table while Rita put on a pot of coffee, moving around my kitchen with the familiarity of decades of friendship. "David," I began once we were all settled, "would you mind showing my children the document Jennifer sent to your company?" He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen before placing it in the center of the table. "Jennifer sent this to my office 6 weeks ago, claiming it gave her authority to negotiate the sale of this property on her mother's behalf." Mark leaned forward, studying the document, then looked at his sister with naked shock. "You forged." "Mom's signature? Are you insane?" Jennifer's composure cracked. It's not." She took a deep breath. "It's not a forgery. Mom signed it during that meeting with the estate planner." "I never met with an estate planner," I said quietly. "The only legal consultation I've had since your father died was with Harold Fisher, our family attorney, to update my will. And, as Harold will confirm, I specifically declined a power of attorney at that time." "Mom, you're confused." Jennifer tried again, her voice taking on that placating tone I'd grown to hate. "You signed several documents that day. This was one of them." "Cut the crap, Jen," Mark snapped, surprising me with his vehemence. "This is criminal. You could go to jail for this." Jennifer turned on him, suddenly angry. "Don't act so innocent. You were completely on board with getting her out of this house. For her own good, remember? Before she hurts herself, remember? You helped convert the garage." "I never agreed to forging legal documents," Mark shot back. "Or selling her furniture without telling her." As they argued, David caught my eye across the table, his expression a mix of sympathy and resolve. "Maggie, do you want to press charges? Because this is serious. Not just the forged POA, but the broader pattern of behavior." The question silenced Jennifer and Mark immediately, both turning to me with identical expressions of alarm. "Press charges?" Jennifer's voice was small now. "Mom, you wouldn't." I looked at my children. These strangers who shared my blood and Frank's, who had once been the center of my world, who had somehow convinced themselves that undermining my autonomy was an act of love. "What I want," I said carefully, "is to understand how we got here. How my own children decided that the best way to handle my aging was to force me into a garage and sell my home from under me." "We were worried," Mark said, his defiance crumbling. "Dad's been gone 5 years, and you're alone in this big house. The stairs, the maintenance. Did it ever occur to you to ask what I wanted? To offer help with the house instead of pushing me out of it?" "We tried," Jennifer protested. "You refused housekeepers. You wouldn't consider moving to a more manageable place." "Because this is my home," I cut her off. "Mine and your father's. Every corner holds memories. The height marks on the kitchen doorframe where we measured you both growing up. The den where Frank graded papers every Sunday afternoon. The backyard where you both learned to ride bikes, where we celebrated birthdays and anniversaries." Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back, determined to finish. "This house isn't just real estate to me. It's not just an asset to be liquidated. It's the physical embodiment of our family's life together. And you were going to sell it to the highest bidder without a second thought." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by the gentle hiss of the coffee maker. "It wasn't like that," Jennifer finally said, her voice small. I thought I was protecting you, your future. By forging my signature? By moving me to the garage? By lying to my doctor about my mental state?" She flinched at each question. "I got carried away. The opportunity with Ridge Summit came up so suddenly, and the offers were so good. Mark needed money for Tyler's college tuition. I have the girls' weddings coming up. It seemed like a solution for everyone." "Everyone except me," I noted. "Mrs. Wilson," David interjected gently, "I believe we need to address the immediate situation. Regardless of Jennifer's intentions, what has occurred here appears to constitute elder abuse under state law. As a mandatory reporter in my position, I'm obligated to notify authorities." Both my children paled at his words. "That won't be necessary," I said after a moment. "Not yet, anyway." David raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? These actions—" "I'm sure that I want to handle this within our family first," I said firmly, "with very clear boundaries and expectations going forward." I turned to Jennifer and Mark. "Here's what's going to happen. First, All of my belongings are to be returned to the house immediately. Everything you've removed, furniture, photos, personal items, brought back by the end of the day." They nodded mutely. "Second, I will be contacting Harold Fisher today to document what has happened and to put additional protections in place, including," I looked directly at Jennifer, "a restraining order if necessary." Jennifer flinched but didn't argue. "Third, both of you will surrender your keys again and will not enter this property without my explicit invitation. My home is no longer accessible to you at your convenience." "Mom," Mark began, but I held up a hand. "I'm not finished. Fourth, Jennifer will contact Ridge Summit Partners officially, withdrawing any claims to represent me and acknowledging the fraudulent nature of the documents she provided." Jennifer nodded, tears now streaming down her face. "And finally," I concluded, "we will all attend family counseling to address how we got to this point and whether there's any path forward for our relationship." The silence that followed was profound, heavy with the consequences of broken trust and the uncertain path toward repair. "I think that's more than fair," David said finally, breaking the tension. "Much more lenient than what the law might require." Rita, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the confrontation, set coffee mugs in front of each of us. "Drink up," she advised. "It's going to be a long day of moving furniture back where it belongs." Mark cleared his throat. "Mom, I'm sorry. I really thought we were doing what was best for you." "That's the problem," I said quietly. "You decided what was best for me without ever really asking or listening. That stops today." Jennifer wiped her eyes, visibly trying to regain her composure. "What about the development? Your house is the last holdout on the block. Everyone else has sold." David and I exchanged glances. "Ridge Summit will be modifying its plans for the Willow Creek project," he said smoothly. "Mrs. Wilson's property will not be included in our development footprint." "Just like that?" Mark looked skeptical. "After all the properties you've acquired?" "Just like that," David confirmed. "My company has a strict ethics policy. We've now become aware of potential exploitation involving this property, which makes it automatically excluded from our acquisition targets." Jennifer looked between us, suspicion dawning. "You two know each other. This isn't just a business meeting." David smiled slightly. "Your mother and I were acquainted many years ago before she met your father." "Acquainted?" Rita snorted. Into her coffee. "That's a polite way of putting it." "Rita," I warned, though without heat. To Jennifer and Mark, I simply said, "There's a lot about my life before you were born that you don't know. Perhaps if you'd been more interested in me as a person rather than as a problem to solve, you might have learned some of it." The rebuke landed heavily. Mark had the grace to look ashamed, while Jennifer seemed to be mentally recalculating everything she thought she knew about the situation. "I think it's time you both left," I said, standing to indicate the conversation was over. "You have furniture to retrieve, and I have a lawyer to call." They rose reluctantly, both looking lost in a way that might have moved me before all this began. Now I simply felt weary, the adrenaline of confrontation fading into a bone-deep exhaustion. At the front door, Jennifer paused. "What happens now? With us, I mean." "That depends on you," I said honestly. "On whether you can learn to see me as a person with agency and dignity, not just your aging mother who needs managing." Mark nodded, seeming to genuinely absorb the message. Jennifer looked less convinced but murmured a quiet, "I'm sorry," before they both left. When the door closed behind them, I leaned against it, suddenly aware of how much energy the confrontation had taken. "Sit before you fall," Rita ordered, guiding me to a kitchen chair. "That was quite a performance." "Not a performance," I corrected her. "Just long overdue boundaries." David had remained at the table, watching me with a thoughtful expression. "You were always stronger than people gave you credit for," he observed, "even back in college." "Had to be," I shrugged. Life doesn't give you many alternatives. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of 50 years and the morning's revelations settling around us. "What will you really do about your development plans?" I asked finally. "My house truly is the last holdout on this block." David smiled, that familiar curve of lips that had once made my heart race. "Exactly what I said. Modify them. We're quite good at working around existing structures when necessary." "And the ethics policy?" "Very real," he assured me. "Though, I'll admit, enforcing it this stringently is easier when the homeowner in question is someone I once cared for very deeply." The admission hung in the air between us, neither of us quite ready to address what it might mean. "I should go," he said eventually, rising from his chair. "I have a development team waiting for direction, and you have a house to reclaim." At the door, he paused, much as Jennifer had. "Would you have dinner with me? Not to discuss business or the past, just dinner. Two old friends catching up." I studied him. This man I'd once nearly married, now returned to my life under the strangest of circumstances. The boy I'd known was long gone, replaced by a successful businessman with silver hair and laugh lines. But something in his eyes was the same, something that had once connected so deeply with the person I used to be. "Dinner," I agreed. "But not tonight. I need time to process everything that's happened." "Of course." He handed me his card, personal cell number handwritten on the back. "Call me when you're ready. I've waited 50 years. I can wait a bit longer." After he left, Rita reappeared from the living room where she'd tactfully retreated during our exchange. "Well," she said, eyebrows raised, "that was unexpected." "Which part? My children's betrayal or my ex-boyfriend's reappearance?" "All of it." She linked her arm through mine. "Come on, let's get your bedroom ready. Those kids will be back with your furniture soon, and I want to supervise every piece they bring in." As we walked through my house, my home, still mine despite all efforts to the contrary, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. The betrayal still stung, the trust broken with my children might never fully heal, but I had prevailed. My home remained my own, my autonomy reaffirmed. And perhaps, just perhaps, a door I thought long closed had reopened, offering an unexpected second chance at a path not taken. 50 years, I murmured, more to myself than to Rita. "What's that, dear?" "Nothing." I smiled, straightening my shoulders. "Just thinking about how life can surprise you, even at 72. "Especially at 72, Rita corrected with a wink. "Now, let's get this house back in order. You've got a date to prepare for." "It's not a date," I protested, though without conviction. Rita just laughed, already pulling sheets from the linen closet for my soon-to-be returned bed. "Whatever you say, Maggie. Whatever you say." The next week passed in a blur of activity. True to their word, though perhaps motivated more by fear, of legal consequences than genuine remorse, Jennifer and Mark returned all my furniture. The movers they hired worked under Rita's eagle-eyed supervision, placing each piece exactly where she directed. By nightfall, my bedroom had been restored, Frank's study reassembled, and the living areas returned to their familiar comfort. I slept in my own bed that night for the first time in nearly a month, wrapped in the quilt Frank's mother had made for our wedding, surrounded by the photographs and mementos of our life together. The relief was profound, yet tinged with a lingering sadness. The trust between my children and me had been fundamentally broken. Whether it could ever be repaired remained an open question. Harold Fisher, our family attorney for over 30 years, arrived the following morning, his weathered briefcase and kind eyes as familiar to me as my own reflection. At 78, he had resisted retirement, claiming that the young sharks in law didn't understand the importance of relationship in legal matters. "Margaret," He greeted me with a formal handshake that quickly turned into a warm hug. I came as soon as I got your message. We settled in Frank's study the morning. Sun streaming through the bay windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. I had always loved this room. The floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the worn leather chair where Frank had read student essays, the collection of river rocks we'd gathered on family camping trips. "So," Harold said, removing his reading glasses and fixing me with a serious gaze, "tell me everything." I did. The gradual campaign to convince me I couldn't manage on my own. The family meetings where my objections were dismissed as confusion. The relocation to the garage. The forged power of attorney. David Reynolds' unexpected reappearance and his company's role in the neighborhood development. Harold took copious notes, his expression darkening as my story unfolded. When I finished, he set his legal pad aside and sighed deeply. "This is serious, Margaret. What Jennifer did, forging your signature on a legal document, that's criminal fraud. And the broader pattern of behavior could constitute elder abuse under state law." "I know," I said quietly. "But they're still my children, Harold. However, misguided and wrong they were, I'm not sure I want to pursue criminal charges." He nodded, understanding rather than judgmental. "There are other ways to protect yourself. First, we need to officially revoke and nullify the fraudulent power of attorney. Then we should establish clear legal boundaries, perhaps a limited conservatorship with someone you trust implicitly who isn't family." "Rita," I said immediately. "She's the only one who stood by me through all of this." "Good choice. We'll also need to document everything that's happened, create a new will with explicit protections against interference, and possibly file a restraining order if you feel physically threatened at all." "I don't think they'd hurt me," I said, though the certainty I once would have felt was notably absent. "They truly believe they were acting in my best interest." "The road to hell," Harold murmured, "is paved with good intentions. And speaking of intentions..." He hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. "What about this developer, David Reynolds? You said you knew him from your college days?" I smiled faintly. "We dated seriously, before Frank. He asked me to marry him, actually." Harold's eyebrows rose. "And now he's developing your neighborhood? That's quite a coincidence." That's exactly what Rita said. I gazed out the window at the garden where spring tulips were beginning to emerge. "I'm having dinner with him. Tonight. Is that wise, given everything that's happened?" "Probably not," I admitted. "But I'm 72, Harold. How many unwise choices do I have left to make?" He chuckled at that, the serious atmosphere lightening slightly. "Fair enough. Just be careful. Even if there's history between you, he's still a developer with business interests that conflict directly with your desire to stay in your home." "I know," I assured him. "My eyes are wide open." After Harold left with promises to begin legal proceedings immediately, I spent the afternoon in my garden, reconnecting with the small patch of earth that had been my solace after Frank's death. The spring bulbs I'd planted last fall were pushing through the soil, defiant and determined, much like I felt. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, I reluctantly returned inside to prepare for dinner with David. I chose a simple navy dress that Frank had always said brought out the blue in my eyes, added a silver necklace he'd given me for our 30th anniversary, and, after a moment's hesitation, spritzed on a small amount of perfume I hadn't worn in years. "Going all out, aren't we?" Rita teased, having let herself in with the spare key I'd given her. "Hot date with the one that got away?" "It's just dinner," I protested, though my careful attention to my appearance betrayed me. "A chance to understand what's happening with the development in my neighborhood." "Mm-hmm," Rita hummed skeptically. "And the lipstick is for property value discussions?" I laughed despite myself. "Fine, I'm curious. Wouldn't you be? The man I almost married 50 years ago suddenly reappears in my life at this precise moment. It feels significant somehow. Or calculated, Rita cautioned, ever the pragmatist. Just because he swooped in like a silver-haired knight doesn't mean his intentions are pure. He's still a developer, Maggie. Your house still sits on land he wants. I know. I applied a final touch of lipstick, studying my reflection. The woman looking back at me was older, certainly, with silver hair instead of auburn, and lines that told the story of a life fully lived. But her eyes were the same, clear, determined, perhaps a bit wiser now. I'll be careful, I promised. Besides, it's a public restaurant. What's the worst that could happen? David arrived precisely at 7, driving a luxury sedan that probably cost more than a year of Frank's and my combined teacher salaries. He came to the door rather than honking from the driveway, a small courtesy I appreciated, and his appreciative glance when I opened the door gave me a flutter of pleasure I hadn't felt in years. You look beautiful, Maggie, he said simply. You clean up pretty well yourself, I replied, noting the tailored charcoal suit and subtle cologne. Where are we going? I thought Riverside Bistro, if that suits you. I'm told it's the best restaurant in Oak Ridge these days. I nodded my approval, a bit impressed he'd done his homework. Riverside had opened just 2 years ago, bringing fine dining to our small town for the first time, and had quickly become the special occasion destination. Rita appeared from the kitchen, arms crossed, giving David an appraising look. Have her home by 11, she said, only half joking. And remember, I know where you live. David laughed, a rich sound that seemed to fill the entry hall. Duly noted, Ms. Fernandez. I'll take good care of her. See that you do, Rita replied, the threat barely veiled beneath her pleasant tone. The drive to the restaurant was surprisingly comfortable, our conversation flowing easily between memories of shared college experiences and updates on the intervening decades. David had been married twice, I learned, once for nearly 20 years to a fellow developer named Catherine, with whom he had 2 grown sons, and briefly in his 50s to a younger woman he described with rueful self-awareness as an expensive mistake. And you? He asked as we pulled into the restaurant parking lot. After Frank passed, was there ever anyone else? No, I said simply. Frank was enough for me, more than enough. He nodded, a flicker of something, regret perhaps? Crossing his face before he masked it with a smile. He was a lucky man. I was a lucky woman, I corrected gently. The maitre d' greeted David by name, suggesting he was already becoming a regular, despite being relatively new to town. We were seated at a corner table with views of the river. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the sunset painting the water in shades of gold and amber. I took the liberty of ordering a special wine, David said after we were settled. A Bordeaux from a small vineyard I invested in years ago. If you'd rather something else. That sounds lovely, I assured him, though wine preferences were far from my primary concern. But David, I hope you understand that this evening isn't just social for me. I have questions about what's happening in my neighborhood. His expression turned serious. Of course. I expected nothing less from you, Maggie. You were never one to be distracted by pleasantries when something important was at stake. The wine arrived, a ritual of presentation and tasting that felt strangely formal after years of casual dinners at home or the community potlucks that formed the center of my social life. When the sommelier departed, I took a small sip. It was excellent, of course, and fixed David with a direct gaze. Tell me about Ridge Summit's plans for Willow Creek, I said. The full version, not the sales pitch. He smiled faintly, accepting the challenge. Straight to business. All right then. He leaned forward, his enthusiasm genuine and immediate. The Willow Creek development is what we call a legacy project, not just housing or commercial space, but a reinvention of community living for the modern era. That sounds like a sales pitch to me, I observed. Fair enough, he conceded. In concrete terms, we're creating a mixed-use development that preserves the character and history of the neighborhood while updating the infrastructure and amenities. Energy-efficient homes with modern comforts but traditional aesthetics. Community. Spaces designed for intergenerational interaction. Local businesses rather than chains. And the existing homes? The ones your company has been buying up. Case by case, he explained. Some will be renovated and incorporated into the development. Others, where the structures are compromised or incompatible with the master plan, will be respectfully demolished and replaced. Respectfully demolished, I repeated. That's quite a euphemism. Progress always involves change, Maggie. The question is whether that change honors what came before while creating something sustainable for the future. It was a smooth answer, well-practiced and sincere-sounding, the kind that had probably won over countless town councils and planning commissions. And my home? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Where does it fit in this vision of progress? He hesitated, taking a sip of wine before answering. Your property is pivotal. The corner lot, the architectural integrity of the house, the established landscaping. In an ideal world, it would serve as an anchor for the entire development. As what? A museum, a sales office, or just another respectfully demolished memory? I had envisioned it as a community center, he said quietly. Preserved almost entirely as is, but open to the public. A place for classes, meetings, intergenerational programs. The garden expanded into a neighborhood feature. The vision he painted was seductive in its way. My home continuing to serve a purpose, to be filled with life and activity rather than just the echoing footsteps of one aging widow. For a moment, I could almost see it. Children learning gardening in the backyard where Jennifer and Mark had once played, community meetings in the living room where Frank and I had hosted countless gatherings of friends and colleagues. It's a lovely fantasy, I said finally. But that's all it is. My home isn't for sale, David. Not to you, not to anyone. He nodded, seemingly unsurprised by my response. I understand. And after what happened with Jennifer and the forged documents, Ridge Summit has officially removed your property from our acquisition targets. The development will proceed around you. Our first course has arrived, a delicate salad for me, some artistic arrangement of seafood for him, providing a momentary reprieve from the intensity of our conversation. Can I ask you something personal? I said, after the waiter had departed. Of course. Why Oak Ridge? Why my neighborhood? Of all the places you could develop, why here? Is it just coincidence that you've reappeared in my life after 50 years? David set down his fork, considering his answer carefully. Initially? Yes, it was coincidence. Oak Ridge fit our development criteria perfectly. Mid-sized town with strong community values, historic architecture, proximity to urban centers, but with its own distinct character. But, I prompted, sensing there was more. But when I saw your name on the property records during our preliminary research, he admitted, I'll confess it influenced my decision to move forward with the project. I was curious, I suppose, about the life you'd built, the choices you'd made. After I chose Frank instead of you, I clarified. Yes. His gaze was steady, unflinching. I've often wondered over the years how different our lives might have been if you'd made a different choice that day. The honesty was disarming, and for a moment I allowed myself to wonder too. What kind of life would I have had with David? Wealth and travel, certainly. But would I have had the deep contentment I'd found with Frank? The joy of teaching generations of Oak Ridge children? The simple pleasures of a life rooted in community and purpose? It wasn't a choice against you, I said finally. It was a choice for the life I wanted, one that aligned with my values and dreams. I know that now, he nodded. I didn't then. I was young and arrogant, convinced I could give you everything you could possibly want. "And now?" I asked. "What does 73-year-old David want from 72-year-old Maggie?" A slow smile spread across his face, warming his eyes. "Right now, to finish this excellent dinner with you. Beyond that, I'd like the chance to know you again, Maggie. Not as a development opportunity, not as a college memory, but as the woman you've become." The rest of dinner passed pleasantly, our conversation drifting to safer topics. Books we'd read, places we'd traveled, the changes we'd observed over decades of living. David was charming and attentive, a skilled conversationalist with just enough self-deprecation to balance his evident success. By the time dessert arrived, a chocolate soufflé we agreed to share, I found myself genuinely enjoying his company, something I hadn't expected when I'd agreed to this dinner. "I've been thinking about your children," David said as we savored the last bites of dessert. "What they did was wrong, unquestionably so. But I wonder if there isn't more to the story than simple greed or control." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by this change in topic. "Such as?" "Fear, perhaps. Not just of losing their inheritance, but of losing you. Aging parents force children to confront their own mortality. Some respond by trying to control the situation, to manage what feels unmanageable." "That's quite insightful," I admitted, "and more generous than I've been feeling toward them lately." "Don't misunderstand," he clarified. "I'm not excusing their actions. What they did was deplorable and potentially criminal, but understanding motivation might help in deciding how to move forward." "Are you speaking from experience?" I asked, sensing there was something personal behind his perspective. He nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "My father developed Alzheimer's in his 60s. My brother and I handled it poorly. We fought over care decisions, living arrangements, financial matters. By the time he passed, we were barely speaking to each other." "I'm sorry," I said softly. "That must have been difficult." "It was!" "And it taught me that family relationships are precious, even when deeply flawed. Sometimes especially when flawed." As David drove me home later, the spring night cool and clear around us, I found myself pondering his words. Jennifer and Mark had behaved abominably, violating my trust and autonomy in ways that still made my anger flare when I thought about them. But they were still my children, still the babies I had carried and the young adults Frank and I had launched into the world, with such hope. "Will you see them again?" David asked, as if reading my thoughts. "Your children, I mean." "Eventually," I sighed. "Harold, my lawyer, suggested family counseling as part of our reconciliation process. If they're willing, I suppose I am too." He pulled into my driveway, headlights illuminating the familiar facade of my home. "For what it's worth, I think that's wise. Difficult, but wise." "What about you?" I asked as he came around to open my door, an old-fashioned courtesy few men observed anymore. "Will I see you again?" In the soft glow of the porch light, his smile was warm and hopeful. "I'd like that very much, Maggie. Perhaps a drive out to Lake Chatham this weekend? The spring wildflowers should be at their peak." The suggestion was so unexpected, so perfectly aligned with things I actually enjoyed rather than the usual dinner or movie, that I found myself agreeing before I'd fully considered the implications. "It's a date," I said, immediately feeling foolish at my choice of words. "Yes," he replied simply, "it is." Then, with a gentleness that took me by surprise, he leaned forward and kissed my cheek. "Good night, Maggie Wilson. Thank you for a lovely evening." I watched his taillights disappear down the street before going inside, where Rita waited in the living room, pretending to read a novel, but clearly having stationed herself there to await my return. "Well," she demanded, setting the book aside, "how was dinner with Mr. Real Estate Developer?" "Pleasant," I said, keeping my tone deliberately neutral as I hung up my coat. The food was excellent. Oh, no, you don't, Rita laughed, patting the sofa beside her. I want details. All of them. Did he try to convince you to sell? Did he charm you with tales of his business empire? Did he mention your almost engagement 50 years ago? I sat beside her, kicking off my shoes with a sigh of relief. All of the above in a way, but not how you might think. I recounted the evening, his candor about the development plans, his admission that finding my name in property records had influenced his decision to pursue the Willow Creek project, his invitation to Lake Chatham. Lake Chatham? Rita's eyebrows shot up. That's not a business dinner location. That's a romantic daytime date if I ever heard one. It doesn't have to be romantic, I protested, though without much conviction. Two old acquaintances enjoying nature. Rita hummed skeptically. And the kiss goodnight? Was that between old acquaintances too? My hand went involuntarily to my cheek where the brief touch of his lips still seemed to linger. It was just a peck on the cheek. Very proper. Proper is holding a door open or pulling out a chair, Rita countered. A kiss, even on the cheek, is personal, Maggie. He's interested in more than your property line. I felt a blush rising. Ridiculous at my age. I'm 72, Rita. A widow. Hardly the stuff of romance. Age is just a number, she dismissed with a wave of her hand. And grief isn't a life sentence. Frank would want you to be happy. You know that. The mention of Frank sobered me. It feels disloyal somehow, I admitted, to even consider enjoying another man's company. Rita's expression softened. Oh, honey. You loved Frank deeply, truly, faithfully for over 40 years. You nursed him through his illness with a devotion few marriages ever see. There's no disloyalty in acknowledging that life continues, that you're still here and have the right to find joy where you can. Tears pricked at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. I miss him, Rita, every day. It doesn't get less, just different. I know, she said simply, taking my hand. And Frank knew too. Remember what he told you near the end? Live well, Maggie girl. That's all I ask. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment as the memory of Frank's voice, weak but determined, washed over me. Live well, as if it were that simple. So, Rita said after a respectful pause, are you going to Lake Chatham with David? I think I am, I admitted. But just as friends exploring a possibility, nothing more. Nothing more yet, Rita corrected with a knowing smile. But possibility is a powerful thing at any age. After Rita left, I moved through my evening routine with an odd sense of dislocation. Everything was in its proper place. My toothbrush, in the master bathroom, my reading glasses on the nightstand, Frank's photograph smiling at me from the dresser. Yet something had shifted, some internal landscape altered by the events of the past weeks. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed Frank and I had shared for decades, and allowed myself to truly consider the possibility Rita had named. Not just friendship with David, but something more. Was I even capable of that kind of emotional opening at this stage of life? Did I want to be? The questions followed me into sleep, where my dreams mixed past and present in confusing tableau. Frank, and David and my children, all moving through scenes that shifted from my college days to my current home to landscapes I'd never seen. Morning brought clarity, as it often did. Over my first cup of tea, watching the early light change the colors in my garden, I made a decision. I would go to Lake Chatham with David. I would approach whatever was developing between us with openness, but caution. And I would do so without guilt, honoring Frank's memory by living well rather than living small. The rest of the week passed in a quiet return to routine. My volunteer shifts at the community garden, lunch with fellow retired teachers, the comfortable rhythms of a life I'd built carefully over decades. The garage stood empty once more, Frank's tools and workbench restored to their proper places, the fold-out sofa and microwave removed as if they'd never been there. Neither Jennifer nor Mark attempted contact, respecting the boundaries I'd established. Harold called to confirm that the fraudulent power of attorney had been officially nullified and that he had begun drafting a new, more protective will and advance directives. Rita stopped by daily, ostensibly to check on me, but clearly also to offer her particular brand of blunt advice about my upcoming date. By Saturday morning, I found myself standing before my closet with an uncharacteristic indecision about what to wear. I hadn't worried about impressing a man in so long that the feeling was almost foreign, a muscle long unused suddenly called into service. Practical but pretty, I muttered to myself, finally selecting comfortable slacks, a lavender sweater Frank had always liked, and walking shoes sensible enough for spring trails, but not so utilitarian as to suggest I'd given up entirely on aesthetics. David arrived precisely at 10, dressed similarly in casual clothes that nonetheless suggested careful selection. He carried a wicker picnic basket and a thermos, looking more like a man from a lifestyle magazine than a corporate developer. "Good morning," he greeted me, his appreciative glance taking in my appearance. "Ready for an adventure?" "That depends," I replied, locking my front door. "What exactly does this adventure entail?" "Lake Chatham has a new botanical trail," he explained as we settled into his car, showcasing native wildflowers and heritage trees. I thought it might appeal to a Master Gardener. I raised an eyebrow. "You've been doing research on me." "Guilty as charged," he admitted with a smile. "The community garden coordinator at Oak Ridge Center was quite effusive about your expertise with native plantings." "Carmen talks too much," I said, though I was secretly pleased that he'd gone to the effort of learning about my interests. The drive to Lake Chatham took us through familiar countryside, the rolling hills and small farms that defined this part of the state emerging from winter dormancy into spring vitality. We chatted easily about changes to the area over the decades, comparing memories of places long gone and expressing surprise at developments neither of us had expected. "Remember Miller's Pond?" David asked as we passed a shopping center that had replaced an old swimming hole, where we went for that midnight swim junior year. "How could I forget?" I laughed. "I thought Professor Holloway was going to expel us all when campus security caught us on the way back to the dorms. Worth it, though," he grinned, glancing over at me. "You in that white swimsuit, moonlight on the water, some memories time can't fade." The comment brought a warmth to my cheeks that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. There was something disorienting about being seen through the eyes of someone who had known me when I was young, desired me then, and somehow still seemed to find the echo of that girl in the woman I'd become. Lake Chatham itself was as beautiful as I remembered, its clear waters reflecting the surrounding hills and trees in perfect mirror images. The botanical trail David had mentioned was new, a carefully maintained path that wound through diverse habitats showcasing the native ecology of the region. As we walked, David proved to be a surprisingly knowledgeable companion, pointing out species I might have missed and sharing interesting facts about their traditional uses or ecological roles. "I'm impressed," I admitted after he correctly identified a rare trillium variety. I wouldn't have expected a developer to know so much about native plants. "Sustainable development requires understanding what was there before we arrived," he replied, a seriousness underlying his casual tone. "Too many of my colleagues see land as blank canvas when it's actually a complex living system." "Is that philosophy reflected in the Willow Creek development?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than confrontational. "We're trying," he said. "Native plantings, rain gardens, permeable surfaces to reduce runoff. It's not perfect, no development can be. But we're aiming for something better than the typical clear-cut and concrete approach. We reached a scenic overlook with a bench positioned to maximize the view of the lake. David spread a small blanket beside it and began unpacking his picnic basket. Fresh bread, local cheeses, early strawberries that must have cost a fortune. This time of year, a bottle of sparkling water. "This is lovely," I said, accepting a plate he'd prepared. "Thank you for suggesting it." "I've been thinking about our conversation at dinner," he said after we'd eaten in companionable silence. "For a while. About choices and paths not taken." I looked at him curiously, waiting for him to continue. "I was angry when you chose Frank," he admitted. "Hurt and bewildered, convinced you were making a terrible mistake. It took me years to understand that we wanted fundamentally different things from life." "We did," I agreed softly. "You wanted to build empires. I wanted to build a life rooted in community and service. Both valid choices, just different visions." "And now?" he asked, his gaze intent. "What do you want now, Maggie?" The directness of the question startled me. I want to stay in my home, to continue volunteering, gardening, being useful to my community, to reconcile with my children if that's possible, to live well, as Frank asked me to. And is there room in that vision for new connections, new relationships? The moment stretched between us, heavy with possibility. I could deflect, laugh it off, keep things casual, or I could be as honest with him as he was being with me. "I don't know," I said finally. A week ago, I would have said no without hesitation. But now, I'm not so sure. He reached across the small space between us, taking my hand in his. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments, Maggie, just openness to possibility." His hand was warm around mine, the touch stirring emotions I'd thought long dormant. "I think I can manage that," I said softly. "Openness to possibility." The smile that lit his face was worth the momentary vulnerability. For the rest of the afternoon, we explored the trails around Lake Chatham, our conversation flowing easily between serious topics and lighthearted reminiscence. There was a comfort in his company I hadn't expected, a sense of being fully seen and appreciated for exactly who I was. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the lake, we reluctantly headed back to the car for the drive home. The day had been nearly perfect. Simple pleasures shared with someone who seemed genuinely interested in me as a person, not just as an obstacle to development plans or an aging parent to be managed. "I have a proposition for you," David said as we approached Oak Ridge, breaking a comfortable silence that had fallen between us. "About your house and the development." I tensed slightly, the spell of the day broken by this return to business matters. "Oh? What if Ridge Summit funded a complete renovation of your home? All the systems updated: electrical, plumbing, heating, cooling, energy efficiency improvements, accessibility modifications if you want them. Everything that would make it easier and safer for you to stay there as long as you choose." I blinked, surprised by the offer. "In exchange for what? Future rights? To the property?" "No strings attached," he said firmly. "Consider it a good faith investment in community relations. And," he hesitated, "a personal apology for my company's unwitting role in what happened with your children." "That's very generous," I said carefully, "but also quite unusual from a business perspective. Your shareholders might have questions." He chuckled. "Perks of being the majority owner. Some decisions I can make without committee approval." As we pulled into my driveway, I considered his offer. A complete renovation would address the very concerns Jennifer and Mark had raised about the house being too much for me. The outdated wiring, the inefficient heating system, the steep back steps that had become treacherous in winter. "I need to think about it," I said finally. "It's a significant offer with implications I want to consider carefully." "Of course," he nodded, seeming to have expected this response. "Take all the time you need." He walked me to my door, the evening air cool enough to make me glad of the light jacket I'd brought. At the threshold, he paused, his expression suddenly uncertain in a way I hadn't seen since our college days. "Thank you for today, Maggie," he said quietly. "For your company, your conversation, your willingness to explore possibilities." "Thank you for suggesting it," I replied, equally sincere. "It was a lovely day." He leaned forward slowly, giving me ample time to step back if I chose to. When I didn't, he pressed his lips to mine in a gentle kiss, brief but unmistakably intentional. Then, with a smile that held equal parts hope and restraint, he bid me good night and returned to his car. I stood on my porch long after his taillights had disappeared down the street, my fingers touching my lips in wonder. 72 years old, and my heart was fluttering like a schoolgirl's after a first kiss. Life, it seemed, was still full of surprises. I couldn't sleep after the Lake Chatham outing with David. The renovation offer he'd made lingered in my mind. Too generous to be purely business, yet too convenient to accept without question. My bedroom ceiling offered no answers as I stared up at it, wondering if I was being naive or overly suspicious. Morning brought no clarity, just the rhythm of habitual tasks, making tea, watering plants, scanning the newspaper headlines. The doorbell's sudden ring startled me mid-sip. Harold Fisher stood on my porch, briefcase in hand, looking more serious than usual. "Margaret, I hope I'm not disturbing you. There's something urgent we need to discuss." "Of course, come in," I said, concerned by his unscheduled visit. Harold wasn't one for surprise calls. We settled in Frank's study, the morning light streaming through the windows as Harold removed a folder from his briefcase. "I've been making inquiries about Ridge Summit Partners," he said without preamble. "Standard due diligence given their interest in your neighborhood and your personal connection to Mr. Reynolds." "And?" I prompted when he hesitated. "And I found something concerning." He placed several documents on the desk between us. Ridge Summit has a pattern of targeting neighborhoods with high percentages of elderly homeowners. They approach properties individually rather than announcing large-scale development plans. My stomach tightened. That's not unusual for developers, is it? "The concerning part is what happens next," Harold continued. "In at least 3 communities in the past 5 years, they've acquired properties gradually, then used those holdings to pressure remaining homeowners through various means: construction disruption, zoning change requests, even challenging property lines and easements." "David assured me they don't pressure vulnerable homeowners," I said, hearing the defensive note in my voice. Harold's expression remained neutral. Maybe Mr. Reynolds wasn't directly involved in those tactics, but they happened under his company's direction. He slid another document toward me, a printout of a news article from a small town in Pennsylvania. The headline read, "Elderly residents claim developer used deceptive practices." The company mentioned here, Horizon Ventures, is a subsidiary of Ridge Summit Partners, Harold explained. Residents reported family members suddenly urging them to sell, citing health concerns and maintenance issues. The parallels to my own situation were too striking to ignore. Jennifer's sudden concern about my ability to live independently. Mark's insistence that the house was too much for me. The garage conversion that happened while I was away. "There's more," Harold said, watching my reaction carefully. "I had my paralegal check the county records. Jennifer has acted as agent on 7 properties sold to Ridge Summit subsidiaries in the past 8 months. I knew about 3, I said, remembering Rita's research. 4 more were handled through different corporate entities, but the paper trail leads back to Ridge Summit." Harold paused. "The timeline is what troubles me most. Jennifer's first contact with Ridge Summit predates her sudden concern about your living situation by only a few weeks." The implication was clear, no matter how much I wanted to deny it. "You think David put her up to this? That he targeted me specifically?" "I don't know," Harold admitted. "But the coincidences are troubling. Your former suitor resurfaces. Just as your children begin pressuring you to sell a property his company wants, that same man suddenly takes romantic interest in you after 50 years, while his company systematically acquires surrounding properties. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my teacup. How would he even know about Jennifer? About me still being here in Oak Ridge? Public records show property ownership, Harold reminded me gently. And social media makes connections easy to discover. Jennifer's professional profiles likely mention her family connections. The study suddenly felt too warm, the walls closing in as I tried to reconcile the charming man who'd kissed me at Lake Chatham with the calculating developer Harold was describing. What should I do? I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. First, we finish securing your legal protections. The new will, power of attorney designating Rita, and the restraining order against Jennifer if necessary. Harold's expression softened. And then perhaps some direct questions for Mr. Reynolds. After Harold left, I sat motionless in Frank's chair, trying to process everything. The garden usually provided solace, but today even that sanctuary seemed compromised. If Harold was right, then everything, the renovation offer, the lakeside outing, the gentle kisses, was part of a sophisticated manipulation. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Thinking of you today. Dinner still on for tomorrow? I stared at the message, unable to formulate a response. Part of me wanted to cancel, to retreat behind protective walls. Another part demanded answers, confirmation or denial of my growing suspicions. Finally, I typed, yes. My house, 7 p.m. I'll cook. Better to have this conversation on my territory, I decided, where I could maintain control of the situation. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation, not just for dinner, but for confrontation. I reviewed the documents Harold had provided, made copies of the most damning sections, and placed them in a folder on my desk. If David denied everything, I wanted evidence at hand. Rita called twice, concerned after hearing from Harold about his visit. Do you want me there tomorrow? She offered. Moral support and all that. No, I said firmly. This is something I need to handle myself. At precisely 7, the doorbell rang. David stood on my porch holding a bottle of wine and a small bouquet of flowers. Not store-bought, but wildflowers, similar to those we'd seen at Lake Chatham. The thoughtfulness of the gesture made what I needed to do even harder. These are lovely, I said, accepting them as he stepped inside. Thank you. They reminded me of our walk, he smiled, following me to the kitchen where I'd set the table. Something smells wonderful. Just pot roast, I replied. Frank's mother's recipe. Dinner conversation remained superficial. Updates on the Willow Creek development, community reactions to the town council presentation, mild gossip about local personalities we both knew. I let him carry much of the discussion, studying him for signs of deception or manipulation. He seemed genuinely engaged, asking thoughtful questions about my gardening plans and laughing at Rita's latest outrageous comments I reported. Was this all an act? A developer's charm deployed to win over a reluctant holdout? Or was Harold's research highlighting normal business practices without sinister intent? As I served coffee and apple tart for dessert, David reached across the table to take my hand. I've been thinking about our discussion at Lake Chatham, he said. About possibilities. I gently withdrew my hand. I've been thinking too, David, about coincidences and patterns. His expression shifted subtly, a wariness entering his eyes. What do you mean? It's time for some direct questions, I said, my heart pounding but my voice steady. And I need honest answers. He sat back slightly. Of course. Ask me anything. When did you first realize I still lived in Oak Ridge? He considered the question. When we began researching properties in the Willow Creek area, your name appeared in the property records. And when did you first contact Jennifer? A flicker of something, surprise? Concern? Crossed his face. I didn't. She contacted Ridge Summit through our general inquiry line. One of our acquisition managers handled it initially. But you knew she was my daughter? Eventually, yes, he admitted. When her name came up in a project meeting, I recognized it. I asked to review the properties she was representing. I took a deep breath. Did you or anyone at Ridge Summit suggest to Jennifer that I might be better off in assisted living? That my house was too much for me to maintain? David's eyes widened. Absolutely not. Why would you think that? Instead of answering, I rose and retrieved the folder from my desk. Returning to the table, I spread out the articles and records Harold had found. Because your company has a history, I said quietly, of targeting elderly homeowners through their families, of creating pressure to sell through various means. David stared at the documents, his expression darkening. Where did you get these? My attorney has been doing some research, I explained. The pattern is concerning, David, especially given what my children tried to do to me. He was silent for a long moment, studying the articles. When he looked up, his expression was troubled. I can explain this, Maggie, but it's complicated. I have time, I said, folding my hands on the table. David sighed deeply. These incidents involved a subsidiary company, Horizon Ventures. They were operating somewhat independently under a regional manager named Carter Donovan. When I discovered their tactics, I fired Donovan and restructured the entire division. When was this? Last year, he admitted. The lawsuit in Pennsylvania was the final straw. I brought in new management and established ethical guidelines for all acquisitions. Yet Jennifer somehow ended up working with Ridge Summit on multiple properties in my neighborhood, I observed, just before she and Mark decided I couldn't live independently anymore. David's expression hardened. I had nothing to do with that, Maggie. Jennifer approached us as a real estate agent with properties to list. Yes, I recognized her name and realized the connection to you. I was curious, I won't deny that. But I never suggested, implied, or directed anyone to pressure you or any other homeowner. The timing is remarkably convenient, I persisted. And what about this renovation offer? Is that standard practice for Ridge Summit too? No, he said firmly. That was personal, entirely personal. Yes, I hope someday you might consider selling to Ridge Summit, but only if and when you're ready. The renovation offer was meant to ensure you could stay comfortably in your home as long as you choose. I wanted to believe him. His explanation was plausible, his indignation at the suggestion of manipulation seemingly genuine. But the evidence before us couldn't be dismissed entirely. I need to show you something else, I said, pulling out Jennifer's fraudulent power of attorney document. Did you personally review this when Jennifer submitted it? He studied the paper, shaking his head. No. Our legal department handles documentation. I only learned about it after you told me you were living in the garage. And what did you do then? I immediately contacted our legal team, had them flag the document as potentially fraudulent, and removed your property from our acquisition targets. His gaze was steady, unflinching. Maggie, I understand why you're suspicious. The circumstances look damning, but I swear to you, I had nothing to do with what Jennifer and Mark did. The sincerity in his voice was compelling, but doubt lingered. Then how do you explain all this? The connections, the timing, the pattern? David was quiet for a moment, thinking, what if Jennifer saw an opportunity when Ridge Summit came to Oak Ridge? What if she researched the company, found my name, and decided to use our past connection to advance her own interests? The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made a certain sense. Jennifer had always been opportunistic, willing to leverage. any advantage in her real estate career. That doesn't explain why she and Mark tried to force me out, I pointed out. Doesn't it? David asked gently. If she stood to gain significant commissions from selling your home to Ridge Summit, might she have orchestrated the whole situation, using concerns about your well-being as a cover for financial motives? My mind raced through the events of the past months, seeing them in this new light. Jennifer's increasing pushiness about Oak Ridge Heights, Mark's sudden interest in my house maintenance, the garage conversion that seemed designed to make me desperate enough to agree to sell. I need to think about this, I said finally. It's a lot to process. David nodded, understanding in his eyes. Take all the time you need, Maggie. I'm not going anywhere. He hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, my interest in you, in us, has nothing to do with your property. If you never sell to Ridge Summit, it won't change how I feel about you. After he left, I called Rita, needing her practical perspective. She arrived within 30 minutes, listening attentively as I recounted David's explanations and Jennifer's possible motivations. Both scenarios are plausible, she admitted when I'd finished. David could be spinning a convincing story to maintain both the development opportunity and his relationship with you. Or Jennifer could have seen Ridge Summit's arrival as a chance for significant commissions and orchestrated everything. How do I know which is true? I asked, truly bewildered. Rita considered this. Maybe you need to hear from Jennifer directly. Confront her with what David suggested and see how she reacts. The idea was daunting but necessary. After 2 months of no contact, reaching out to Jennifer felt like reopening a wound that had barely begun to heal. But I needed answers more than comfort. I texted her the next morning. We need to talk. Important information has come to light. Coffee at Willow Creek Cafe, 2 p.m. tomorrow. Her response came almost immediately. I'll be there. Thank you, Mom. The cafe was quiet when I arrived, the mid-afternoon lull between lunch and dinner crowds providing the privacy needed for difficult conversations. I'd chosen a corner table away from the few other patrons, ordering tea to steady my nerves while I waited. Jennifer appeared precisely at 2, looking both nervous and hopeful as she approached. She'd lost weight since I'd last seen her, dark circles under her eyes suggesting troubled sleep. Mom, she said, her voice catching slightly. Thank you for seeing me. Sit down, Jennifer, I said, neither warm nor cold. We have things to discuss. After ordering coffee, she folded her hands on the table, visibly steeling herself. How have you been? Let's skip the pleasantries, I replied. I need to understand exactly what happened with Ridge Summit Partners. Her expression flickered. With surprise. What do you mean? I know you acted as agent for at least 7 properties sold to their subsidiaries, I said, watching her closely. What I need to know is whether they approached you first or you approached them. Jennifer hesitated, clearly weighing her response. I saw an announcement about their expansion into Oak Ridge. I researched the company and realized David Reynolds was one of the founders. I remembered seeing his name in your old college photos. Go on, I encouraged when she paused. I thought it might give me an edge, she admitted, staring into her coffee. If I could mention a personal connection. Real estate is competitive, Mom. I needed those commissions. And the idea to move me to assisted living? Was that your idea too? Or did someone from Ridge Summit suggest it? Jennifer's head snapped up, genuine shock in her eyes. No one from Ridge Summit suggested anything about your living situation. That was... She trailed off, shame coloring her features. That was what, Jennifer? My idea, she whispered. After I started working with them, I realized how valuable your property would be to their development plans. The commissions on a sale to Ridge Summit would be substantial, enough to cover Tyler's college tuition and then some. The Stark? Admission hung between us. more damning in its honesty than any defensive lie would have been. "So you decided to declare me incompetent," I said flatly. "To forge a power of attorney. To move me to the garage while you prepared to sell my home out from under me." Tears welled in her eyes. "I convinced myself it was for your own good, that you'd be safer, happier at Oak Ridge Heights. I told myself so many lies to justify what we were doing. And Mark, he was reluctant at first," Jennifer admitted. "But he's having financial problems too. The business is struggling, and the girls' college funds aren't growing as he'd planned. I persuaded him that this was the best solution for everyone." The pain of her betrayal was fresh again, but now mixed with something else. A terrible clarity about how financial pressures and opportunism had corrupted my daughter's judgment, leading her to rationalize increasingly unethical decisions. "Did David Reynolds know about any of this?" I asked, needing final confirmation. Jennifer shook her head. "No, I never told him about our plans for you. I just presented myself as your daughter who happened to be a real estate agent with access to desirable properties." She looked up, sudden understanding dawning. "Is that what you thought? That he was involved in what we did to you?" The possibility had crossed my mind, I admitted. "Mom, no," Jennifer said emphatically. "This was all me. My desperation. My terrible choices." Her voice broke. My complete failure as a daughter. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of her confession settling between us. Outside, life continued. People walking past the cafe windows, cars moving along Main Street, the ordinary rhythm of Oak Ridge undisturbed by our private reckoning. "What happens now?" Jennifer finally asked, her voice small. "I don't know," I replied honestly. Trust once broken isn't easily rebuilt, but understanding the truth is a necessary first step. Later that evening, I called David and asked him to come over. When he arrived, looking apprehensive, I led him to the porch swing Frank had installed decades ago. As dusk settled over the neighborhood, I told him about my conversation with Jennifer, her confession, and my new understanding of what had happened. "I owe you an apology," I concluded, "for doubting your motives." David took my hand gently. "You had every reason to be suspicious, Maggie. The circumstances were damning, and you've been through a terrible ordeal. Where does this leave us?" I asked, echoing Jennifer's earlier question. He smiled, the warmth reaching his eyes. "Exactly where we were before, exploring possibilities, one day at a time. With perhaps a bit more honesty and a bit less doubt." As night fell over Oak Ridge, we sat together on that porch swing, talking about everything and nothing, his development plans that would now permanently exclude my property, my garden projects. For the summer, memories of our college days, and tentative hopes for whatever future remained to us. The garage stood empty once more, returned to its proper purpose. My home remained my castle, secure now from both well-meaning interference and opportunistic manipulation. And I remained Margaret Wilson, transformed by betrayal and reconciliation, wiser about human nature, but still open to the astonishing possibility of late-life love. Life, as Frank always used to say, finds a way to surprise you, just when you think you've got it figured out. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.